All right, welcome everybody to Mark Jones' free info session today on his upcoming workshop on the outer planets as the bridge to the soul. So Mark will be joining us in Portland, Oregon at the McMinimans Kennedy School. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute on September 9th and 10th, 2017, and he'll be giving a two-day weekend workshop. So he'll be presenting all day, both days, about the outer planets. So welcome, Mark. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So Mark is just going to tell us a little bit about what he has in store for us, what he'll be teaching over the weekend, and we're here to answer any questions that you have, any logistical questions, happy to take those, and otherwise. And then after Mark talks for a bit, I'll tell you a little bit more about the venue here in Portland, which is really cool. We were there last year and worked out really well, and so I'll tell you more about that. It's a neat space. So Mark, you want to just tell us a little bit about what inspired you to do this workshop and what you'll be teaching?
Yes, I mean, it came to my attention again recently as I was listening to some archived Dane Rudyard talks from the latter part of his life, where Rudyard became singularly focused on the meaning and purpose of astrology, I think it would be fair to say, because he felt very concerned about its impact on people and why. And he goes on record at one point in this talk saying, the outer planets are transformation. They just literally, it's the section of the chart that deals with transformation. And he's increasingly concerned at the end of his life that the transformational aspect of his legacy is understood. And I guess for me, the sole purpose really for engaging with astrology in any larger or meaningful way is personal, psychological, spiritual transformation. And to me, the outer planets are the single greatest and most direct path to understanding that possibility of soul transformation, or really, in a way, higher power or your own soul nature radiating into your personal life and changing you in this life, which is my great interest, my personal path, and really why I study astrology, why I find astrology so interesting, is that it can comment on that. So we'll be looking at how are they symbols or signatures of transpersonal power? How could that soul radiance come into one's personal life? Towards the end of his life, Rudyard was very focused on the work of Sri Aurobindo, an Indian yogi and sage who was originally educated in England in private schools, who started to synthesize Western thought with Eastern thought. And Aurobindo talks about two aspects of the soul: the part that is clear, dedicated, and silent, an understanding of the divine, resting, if you like, in an infinite love and infinite gratitude for the creation. And then an evolving part of the soul that he called the psychic being, the part of the soul that's trying through its radiance to reach the personality, the mental, emotional body, the physical body of the person, and influence the progression of their life. And I feel that the outer planets, correctly understood in a natal chart, can refer to the orientation or intention of this psychic being, this externalizing aspect of the soul nature, and the way that it seeks to interpenetrate itself in the personal life, and therefore enrich and deepen one's personal experience on this beautiful planet. So the workshop will very much focus on the natal chart, how to break down and understand all three of the outer planets and their role within that transpersonal understanding. But it will also have a whole section looking at now, based on my recent studies both of historical personages for seminars for the Astrology University, and increasingly now experience with clients and students going through deep transformative processes who are kind enough to give me permission to use their chart, where we're going to have a section of the workshop where we focus on just what is involved, what transit pictures, what archetypal transits, like Saturn returns, Uranus returns, what was Pluto doing, what was Uranus doing in moments of great transformation within the individual life. How are these things operational factors in deeper change, processes of deeper change? So the workshop will also include this much more practical emphasis of just what's involved in a person's life when the deeper part of their nature reaches out to them and changes their life. So we'll be looking to see how can astrology identify the transformative power of the soul operating through you on a personal level. And that's really the core purpose of the workshop. It will include separate practical technical breakdowns of Uranus, Pluto, Neptune. It will include new teachings of mine on Neptune. And it will include these extended personal sessions of focus on key transformative junctures in people's lives, and just what it was that led them either to take a step into the deeper life or to fall back from that in some kind of fear or rejection of the deeper life, which is its own statement, really, its own. Even to not transform in certain situations is its own process, isn't it? Its own significance.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. It sounds really, really rich, like a really rich perspective, and very welcome, I think. So, folks, if you have any questions about what Mark's going to be presenting, feel free to just type them in to the chat window, or any questions about what he's just said. I'm going to give you a few more of the logistics about the event. So we'll be at the historic Kennedy School, which is a really cool venue here in Portland that is basically an old elementary school in a beautiful old neighborhood that has been lovingly converted and transformed into a kind of entertainment complex that includes a hotel, a movie theater, several little pubs, restaurants, a wading pool, and did I already say movie theater? So it's amazing that all this stuff is in this one spot. And what's really cool is they also have classrooms that some of the classrooms are kept, and they're open to use for events. So we'll actually be in one of the old classrooms. It actually has the original chalkboard in there, and it's just been lovingly restored. It's beautiful. The whole place is full of really cool art, and it's just a nice, neat place to be. The hotel itself tends to get booked up. It's one of the more popular places to stay in Portland, but we do have a few rooms reserved if you wanted to stay at the hotel, and you can get those by mentioning Mark's workshop. If you have any problems with that, feel free to email me. And then also, we just encourage people to try Airbnb in the neighborhood. There are tons of Airbnbs in this neighborhood, and you can just walk to the venue and get to experience staying in a really lovely, walkable Portland neighborhood. There's tons of shops and restaurants nearby that you can walk to, and it makes for a really nice experience. So we do have a question that just came in from Kevin. Mark, can you explain your view of transformation? In other words, what does it mean when you say transformation?
Yeah, well, that's a brilliant question. I mean, you could do a weekend just on that question alone, couldn't you, Kevin, really? I mean, the root has, in technical terms, a transformer in engineering is something that steps voltage either up or down. So a transformer working one way steps down an enormous higher voltage, and we could say metaphorically, the soul's energetic power is stepped down into the personal life through one process of transformation. And looked at from the other perspective, the frequency or voltage of the personality is stepped up into the life of the soul. So I'm looking at transformation as a psychological and spiritual growth process, primarily. That Rudyard's idea that we're born, as it were, emergent cosmic seeds, and our identity is seeking to kind of flower into being. Transformation is the recognition of the deeper background, in a way, the transpersonal unconscious, or deeper self coming into the personal self. So where am I getting from this in Rudyard? That's a question in itself that will be referred to in the workshop. I will completely reveal all sources. This isn't like a kind of esoteric, we have no attachment to some sort of esoterica here. I will name and reference every source of where the information is coming from. Most of it's coming from a series of pamphlets he wrote for the Theosophical Society later in life, and his late talks. It's kind of the late summation of his thinking. But it's present in Astrology of Personality, Astrology of Transformation, other, more seminal books of his. But I have a very particular relationship to how I've integrated his late writing into that process, and his psychological and spiritual understanding at the latter point of his life. But to return to the subject of transformation, what I find is most people go into crisis, they become stuck, they want to seek a therapist or an astrologer because something in their personal life has become stuck. And what's often stuck is some deeper unconscious or even transpersonal dimension within them, some aspect of their deeper self that cannot get through to the layers of conditioning in their experience, the way they've been created by the psychodynamic forces of childhood, the way that certain repressive ideas in society, that the religion they're attracted to, the expression of their sexuality is not understood by the consensus in which they grew up, and they've had to hide parts of themselves. These kinds of factors going into deeper emotional dynamics. To me, the soul is like a field, an energy field around the person, and this field has core emotional and psychic dynamics within it. And these influence people in very direct ways, but they're often unconscious of the direct way they're being influenced. So transformation for me is often helping people to understand the unconscious and transpersonal powers or influences in the background of their life, that sometimes the lack of understanding that's gone on of those processes, the lack of mirroring they've had for their own deeper identity. I've just spoken today to 2 people, doing readings for 2 people I'd never spoken before, both of whom had received messages. One had literally, like, an angelic presence had materialized and spoken to her about the next step in her life. Another lady had had direct knowings, an inner voice just telling her something wasn't right. And both people, to a certain extent, had struggled to make sense of even this direct level of information. People are crying out in their suffering at times to know what the next step is. And the ultimate irony is sometimes they're shown that next step and they don't feel capable of taking it because of these variety of conditioning factors or unresolved psychological, emotional components from childhood, interspersed with karmic or soul memories of challenging or negative circumstances. So there is this complex multidimensional picture to human growth. Frequently, people's memories they're carrying in their soul of the most significant things that have happened to them, things that remain perhaps unresolved emotionally or psychically within them on a subtle level, get constellated by childhood experience. So soul creates childhood to recreate its memory dynamics. And then childhood is what conditions us, as depth psychology has pointed out, in the early parts of our life. And then frequently that conditioning stands in our way. Even as it builds as foundation for human life, it can stand in the way of that deeper dimension of experience that lies behind it. So transformation is a complex picture. The whole weekend, in a way, will be an attempt to answer that, whilst including practical and technical teaching on natal chart dynamics and transit and movement pictures.
Awesome. So that definitely an essay answer there. That's great. Thanks, Mark.
Well, and in another simple way of looking at it, though, actually to simplify, well, thank you, Kevin. Another way to think about it is the very outer planets themselves, they represent that transpersonal dimension. So their interface with personal planets, or the nodes of the moon, the outer planets and the way they interact with the rest of the chart, they represent, if you like, a kind of soul information, outer planets, radiating into the rest of the chart. And the goal would be to see what happens if that radiance was allowed in, and see what happens to the flowering of the personal self if that energy can be allowed in.
Beautiful. So we have a question from Joyce, who's wondering how this might be different from the CD that you have out on the outer planets. And the first thing I can say, Joyce, is definitely the length is going to be very different because Mark will be talking for an entire weekend. But I'll let Mark speak to what else might be different about the presentation.
Well, so the presentation will include the perspective on Pluto that was in the foundation course in a condensed and intensified form. It will include Uranus memory teachings that I have given in other places in a condensed and intensified form. But really, the great majority of the weekend is almost entirely new material. I've never taught directly on Neptune, actually, as it exists as a natal chart dynamic, rather than just as a principle or potential of a higher love to transform the Venus function. This will extend that into a view of looking at Neptune as the way that people process their relationship to a greater reality. But the most practical difference is the amount of attention that will be placed on the transformational turning points in people's lives. So we're gonna have enough time in the weekend format to identify the core natal structures and their meaning, but then to be able to look at carefully prepared selected examples of turning points in the life of significant personages and clients and students of mine whose direct personal experience I can attest to. And we will be looking therefore at situations where there are known recordings. We understand completely the shift that's occurred, and we'll be looking at the chart of that moment as it applies to the understanding of the natal chart that we've gained through these perspectives. So, simply put, the teaching on Neptune is entirely new and different. It's going to focus more specifically on the actional importance of these placements, how they exist as turning points in people's lives. And that the material on Pluto and Uranus that is a central part of all my teaching will be condensed into an intensified format so that it becomes something that's more readily accessible to people, almost like on a, not quite a keyword kind of teaching, but almost like to that level where we repeat the core information right at the beginning in a condensed and solidified form so we can know we can always trust it. What I find is the degree to which there is repetition, and although some people struggle with this, say even on a webinar recently, there was a question about, can you get to the nodal rulers? Because we're still looking at the nodes, but how do we fully understand the nodal rulers without understanding the nodes first? How do we really understand the subtle advances in my teaching over the last few years through my client and student work if we can't understand the core material that got me to that point in the first place? And as we repeat that core material, just to the extent that the core teachings on Pluto and Uranus will remain similar but condensed into intensified form, we are learning the core infrastructure, the building blocks of how to read charts from a depth perspective in a way that just becomes a background awareness in our consciousness so that this becomes effortless. And that's where it's got to with me, without sounding full of myself or whatever, with very little chart preparation now. A few minutes to just memorize someone's chart so I can look them in the eye and still have their basic chart structure in my mind's eye. We're talking about the capacity to make transformational impact in 75 minutes of conversation. Just 10 minutes before I logged in with Tony, 10 minutes ago, 10 minutes before we started, someone thanking me for the most intense conversation in their life because of sticking with the basic signatures and going back to it and realizing that something like a Pluto conjunct the North Node ruler in her chart has so much information that your first pass of analysis will never get all of it. And staying with it over the whole course of the reading was utterly life transformational. So to the extent that there is some repetition of the core teaching on Pluto and Uranus, which has been the backbone of my work for years, every time we do it, if we're open, the potential to deepen and internalize that teaching in a way that you might feel empowered to use it when you look at charts and actually look the person in the eye and say it to them, because that's the key. That's the kicker, isn't it? It's not just being able to see it in a chart. It's being able to feel such an innate sense of trust in its transformative power that you actually share it with that person you've never met before in that one single conversation that might change their life. And in a sense, those stakes are very interesting, aren't they? Astrology itself, just to study this kind of astrology, just to contemplate these kinds of dynamics, is transformational in itself. So just to go over that core ground is to all be prepared to be in that space together and be transforming as I'm transforming as I teach it, that my students are potentially transforming as they're there and they ask me questions about it and we go into dialogue about it. And that's the other huge advantage, of course. Even if it's material that I've taught in places before, here is an opportunity for live people to ask me, even like here today now, Kevin's clarification about my meaning of transformation. The key point of the workshop space, as opposed to the lectures at conferences, is that people can stop me and ask me. And we can take 10, 15 minutes out and clarify something on a much deeper level. And what so often turns out to have this almost like miraculous quality to it is that the question that someone's asked that's blocking them individually turns out to have this relevance, this unexpected relevance for a whole bunch of other people in the room. And that the question leads to me teaching in a different way. And that's when we really reach that kind of harmonic that we're all growing together in the space, that the very questions, the very needs of the students evoke something from me and make this a shared and lived experience, a shared teaching.
That's great. And that's a great description, I think, of what happens in the classroom in your workshops too, Mark. So thanks for that. And we had a question from another attendee wondering, from which of Rudyard's writings did you glean the understanding that you were talking about earlier?
Well, a whole series of them, which I'll discuss in detail in the workshop. But that online Rudyard archive holds audio material of his late talks. And it's from one of those, I believe it's called Astrology as a Cosmic Psychosynthesis, that he discusses the outer planets as the transformational signatures. But really that interpenetrates all of his writing. There's a series, the nodal teachings I take from a rare pamphlet on the lunar and planetary nodes, his angle on transpersonal meaning from a book called From Humanistic to Transpersonal Astrology for the Theosophical Society. Core parts of his teachings of this were present even in the latter chapters of Astrology of Personality as early as 1936. But there are other interweavings. We have to take his sections on the outer planets as higher octaves of the personal planets, which we'll touch on in the workshop, but move quickly through, because it's really just an opening to the field of their depth. So there are a series of sources. I mean, I'm happy to take personal emails about that if someone's interested in a particular Rudyard book, because his work, to be frank, is quite patchy. You know, a short pamphlet can give you enough material to study for years, whereas a whole book might just be a huge digression on a theosophical metaphor of like a flower opening in a star or something. And past the poetry of it, it has very little astrological in-depth study. But it's his work that is the starting point for this teaching, but it's his work as reimagined through my work as a spiritually orientated psychotherapist and astrologer who specializes in guiding people and being with people whilst they take transformational steps in their life. So it's Rudyard reinterpreted through that living, therapeutic and transformational lens.
Thanks, Mark. And thanks for all those questions today, folks. Appreciate you coming by. And thanks, Mark, for taking time out. I'm going to let you go here in just a couple of minutes. I know it's the end of the evening for you. So I just wanted to say a couple of more logistical things about the workshop that are kind of cool. One of them is because we're at a venue that has restaurants in it, they'll actually be feeding you while you're there. So we'll have lunch.
It's really nice food.
Great, thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
We'll be feeding you lunch both days, and yeah, the McMenamins sources their food from the Pacific Northwest, and the produce here is really great. I can attest to that. And we'll also have coffee and tea flowing throughout the day to keep you awake in the afternoon for sure. And there will be some very light snacks for breakfast, although I recommend that people eat breakfast before they come for sure. But if for some reason you're running late, there will be a little bit of something there. They usually have some bagels or something like that out, if I remember right. But definitely try to eat before you come. We do honor special dietary requests. So we're fully used to that here in Portland, Oregon. So anything that you need, just let us know. We've kind of taken that into account with McMenamins preparing the menu. But if there's something special that you need, feel free to ask. And if you have any questions about lodging or getting to the venue or anything like that, please feel free to email me. McMenamins is actually very close to the airport. So if you're flying into town, it's about a 15-minute drive from the airport. So super close. Awesome. So I think that's about it. I'm just going to pop up this flyer here from the that we made for the event that we had at the NORWAC conference this year. And I'll leave you with that as we say goodbye. And thanks again, Mark, for being with us today. Really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to tell us a little bit more about the workshop.
Thanks, Tony.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. And with that, I will say goodbye, and we will see you next time. Thanks for joining us. Take care.